Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, on behalf of ITech and University of Washington, I would like to welcome all of you in this first contact session of the Clinical Management of HIV course this year. You might be aware by now that this course is, we conduct this course every year for India and here Indian participants. But the University of Washington, they conduct this course on site there in the university, and then they upload lectures and presentations on the website. So a very warm welcome to all of you for this course. You may be aware that this will be run over 3 months period from now, and every week there will be one clinical contact session, which essentially will have a theme for the week or module for the week. For each module, there will be 2 lectures which will be uploaded on the Canvas, UW Canvas, which you might have access by now. And the expectation is that every participant is supposed to go through those 2 sessions before participating in the clinical contact session. Ideally, all of us should meet and discuss that week's module, but obviously it is not possible in our case because all of us are situated in different states and different cities. That is why University of Washington has given this exception to our site, Delhi site, that we can conduct it through Zoom. And obviously in this COVID scenario, there are some other sites also which are conducting this contact session in this manner. But nevertheless, what we will do is that the presenters like today, Dr. Priya Kannan will talk about the first session. So similarly, there will be clinical facilitators for each week. And the idea is to have a discussion where the clinical facilitator will go through the content of the UW presentations and also will talk about the Indian context. So please feel free to post your questions and towards the end discussion points and whatever. This is very informal setting. So this is not kind of a lecture what we are giving here. All lectures have already happened and those are already uploaded on the Canvas website. The clinical facilitator here will try to summarize those lectures and also talk about the Indian context of the topic. So again, on behalf of ITech, I would like to wish you all the best for these 3 months. And there is always a WhatsApp group. If you have any queries, comments, please reach out to us. And also you can participate in the clinical discussion on the Canvas website. So all the best, everyone, and look forward to having a fruitful discussion in over this 3 months period of time. Thank you so much. And over to you, Priya.
Thank you so much, sir. It was nice to have you here. So I hope I'm audible. Shweta, can you just confirm if you're able to
Yes,
see
yes,
the
you're audible. Yeah, the screen is visible. You can
okay.
just,
Yeah, thank you. So like Dr. Anwar had just mentioned, hearty welcome to all of you, and ITech takes great pleasure in welcoming you all for the 2021 Clinical Management of HIV course. Now, Dr. Anwar has already given you a brief of about how the course is scheduled and how it is going to look like for the next 3 months. But there are some points that, I think if we can just brush over, a lot of doubts will be cleared. So this is basically, we are all logging in from the India site for this course. The clinical facilitators, including Dr. Anwar, we have other clinical facilitators who will be facilitating the weekly sessions for the Indian participants. Our site coordinator is Shweta Patil. I'm sure all of you have already gotten in touch with her in some form or the other. And she will be there throughout to help you all with any technical difficulty that you're having while doing the course. Now, a little brief about ITech India for whoever doesn't know. So ITech stands for International Training and Education Center for Health. And we are basically a national organization and we work in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. And we are here to support the National AIDS Control Program. And this is basically, we work as one of the lead implementing partners of the United States Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And so we have our roots in the international, in ITech UW, that is University of Washington in Seattle. And recently in 2017, we have become a private limited entity in India. So this course mainly aims to provide in-depth training on both diagnosis as well as the clinical management of HIV. Now, the course that is conducted here, this is actually by University of Washington. There are almost participants from over 20 countries who participate in the course. This is basically, it is a blend of both. So there is the majority component of this course is web-based. That is, you have your online modules, there are readings, you're supposed to go through them, your assignments are online, but there is this weekly sessions, the contact sessions, where we will try and have, so though it is not possible in person, so we are trying to have a platform for online discussion. Now the duration, the course started on 5th April, the module opened and it will last until 13th June. So there are a total of 10 modules. Each module runs through 1 week, and hence there'll be 10 weekly seminars. That is one lecture every week that will be conducted by iTech India. So the website here is given, uwgh.instructure.com, and this is where you have to start your login for the course. Now, this is the syllabus. It basically more or less covers every aspect of management of HIV. And though the modules will to some extent revolve around the condition or status of the United States, because this is a UW course, but in the clinical contact sessions, we will try to bring in the Indian perspective and the Indian guidelines so that it is more useful and fruitful for people like us who are working on the field. So the learning activities, you're all expected to contribute at least 6 to 8 hours every week. And by 6 to 8 hours, we really mean that if you really want to have a good takeaway from this course that you can go back and use in your field wherever you're working in right now, it is expected that you put in these fruitful 6 to 8 hours. So it will involve watching the recorded lectures. Like we said, for every module, there will be about 2 lectures, which are recorded lectures, which are put up by the University of Washington. So these are lectures which were conducted live in the University of Washington in Seattle, and those have been recorded and uploaded on the Canvas. So then you're all also expected to post in the discussion forums. Now, though the discussion forums, they are not mandatory, but it will help to understand the situation or the guidelines of different countries. Like I said, we have participants from over 20 countries. So this discussion platform is a very good platform to know, to have that cross-country learning of what is happening elsewhere. Completing weekly quizzes. So there is a quiz that you will have every week after every module, and this is mandatory. So the quiz is mandatory and it has to be submitted within the given timeline. I shall throw some more light on this in the coming slides. There are a lot of required readings. So for every module, there are readings which are posted up on the Canvas. Again, so there are assignments, the homework assessments, and for these assessments, you will have to go through the readings as well in order to complete them. So when it comes to grading, so like I said, there are 2 important components, the weekly quizzes and the homework assessments. The discussion forums, they are there, but they are not mandatory. It does not contribute to your grades. The weekly quizzes, there is 1 quiz every week that will contribute to 50% of your total score. And homework assessments, there are about 3 or 4 assessments, depending. Like there are some modules where you'll have only 1 or 2. There are some modules where you'll have 3 or 4 homework assessments, and they will contribute to 50% of your total grade. So in a total, you have to score a 70% or more in order to successfully get the course completion certificate. Now, apart from the quiz and assessment, because we have these 10 clinical contact sessions, it is expected that the attendance for these sessions is 7 or more. So only when you satisfy all the 3 criteria, that is, your contribution from the weekly quizzes and the homework assessment and your attendance in the clinical contact session, only if these 3 are satisfied, will you get the certificate of completion. So we request you to please take the quizzes and assessments seriously and try to finish it well within time. Now, most of these are already, they are open book. Because you have reference to the material, you can refer to the material before you attempt the quiz and the assessment, but it does take time. So please take out time, but ensure that you finish all these within the given timelines. So what is the difference between two? So the weekly quizzes, they are available only when the module is open. So there is limited. So there is, and in your course canvas, you can see when the quiz is due and when the quiz is going to close. But the homework assessment will remain open throughout. But it is suggested and really highly recommended that you keep completing your homework assessments along with the respective modules. Believe me, please do not carry forward work from one module's assessments to the second module, because they are going through the content of these modules is very time consuming. The material that you have is very rich. And if you really want to make use of this course, we would recommend that you stick to the module. So because in one module, you get one complete week to do the readings, to do the quiz, to do the assessment. So please utilize that 1 week for that one particular module. And we recommend that you please do not carry forward your assignments, though it is available and though it is open. So the quizzes are due at around 12 p.m. on every Monday, and even the homework assessments. Now, in some cases, in exceptional circumstances, late submissions may be allowed. Please communicate with Shweta if you're not able to, or when you are not able to complete a quiz. But again, if there are too many late submissions, again, it will be a problem with issuing the certificate. So please ensure that unless and until there is a dire emergency and you are not able to complete it, it's fine. But otherwise, we recommend that everything should be finished within the given due date, because once the quiz gets closed on the canvas, even we cannot open it again. So please ensure that before the closure date, before the due date, you submit your quizzes and your homework assignments. Now, again, one important thing is in the weekly quiz, you have only one attempt. So whatever you score in that one attempt is final. So like I said, again, it is open book. So it is still, I mean, though it is open book, like I told you earlier, it is not going to be straightforward. You will still have to take out time to go through the content and then answer the questions. But there is only one attempt for the quiz. Whereas the homework assessments, though they are also objective type. So it is not a subjective answers. You have objective type questions even in the homework assignments, but the advantage is there are multiple attempts. So now in case, because your weekly quiz has only one attempt, there is another opportunity for scoring in case you do not do well in the quizzes. That is something called the extra credit. So in your entire course, there are a total of 8 extra credit assessments. And we would recommend that whenever possible, if you have time in that module, please do the extra credit assessments also, because it could so happen that, you do not perform so well in your quizzes towards the last modules. So these extra credits can cover up for that. But please remember that these extra credit assessments will contribute to the grading only of the weekly quizzes, not of the homework assessments. So these are two different things. From weekly quizzes, 50% of your grade will be taken. From homework assessments, 50% will be taken. So in your weekly quizzes, so far, if you have scored, say 60%, if you want to improve that score and you get 8 points in these extra credits, your quiz score will become 68, but your homework score will not change. So it is important that you keep a balance of both. But the advantage of these extra credits is in case you do poorly in any of the quizzes, like I said, quiz has only one attempt. So if you do poorly in any of the quizzes, you have a chance to regain your score using the extra credits. Now, as Dr. Anwar already mentioned, the session that we are having, like the one we are having right now, is a clinical contact session. Now, please, just to emphasize, this is not a lecture. It is impossible to cover what is given in one module in a lecture of maybe 1 or 1.5 hours. So we are here only to facilitate you, to guide you, to summarize what has been given in the module. But you will have to go back to your module, go through the recorded lectures, go through the readings, if you really have to understand the concept completely. So we are always here to help you if you have any doubts or if you have any queries. But just attending the clinical contact session may or may not help you completely with your assessments and your quizzes. So it is expected that you go through the readings which are uploaded in the modules. We will try to keep the session every Friday, and we'll try to stick to the time 3:30 to 5. In case there are any changes, you will all be intimated over the WhatsApp group. So the WhatsApp group, I'm sure all of you are already members of the WhatsApp group. Now, just to reiterate, this is not a group where you will share your good morning messages or forwards. That is not encouraged. This platform has to be completely used for this course. So any information related to the course, if we want to share with the participants, we will use the WhatsApp group. Similarly, if you have any queries regarding the course, regarding the content in the course, please feel free to post it on the WhatsApp group. But we do not encourage forwards of any category in this group. Also, please do not, there is no room for discussion of any quiz questions or the assessment questions. We cannot discuss the answers here because that may count as plagiarism and it may lead to discontinuation from the course. So please use the platform, the WhatsApp platform, for a fruitful discussion and to get your queries answered. Now, these are the major contacts. This PowerPoint will be shared with all of you. So in case you have any problem, you can always reach out to us. Praveenji is our IT specialist. So if you have, again, any technical problem with the website, with the Canvas, with the logging in, he'll help you out. Shweta is always there with us, and she is very quick in responding to messages. So you can always get in touch with her if you have any query about the course. So I hope all of you have already logged in. Shweta, is there anybody who has not yet logged in? Do you have any clue? Because then I can skip through this content.
Nee, please go through these steps because we don't have access to how many have logged in by now.
Okay, chalega. So I think most of you have logged in. In case you have not yet logged into the course, so the instructions are very simple. You have to go to this website, that is uwgh.instructure.com. It will immediately ask you, this page will open up. So what you're supposed to do is with whatever email you registered for this course, please type in that email ID here completely. So if you're going to use any other email ID, this will not work. You have to use the email ID that you used for registering in this course. Once you put in your email ID, you have to click on forgot password. So once you click on forgot password, this page will open up where it will ask for your email address, and you have to select this option called request password. So you have to type in the same email ID again, and you have to click on the tab request password. Immediately in your email, you will get an instructions for creating your password. So please remember that there are chances that this email can go into your spam box. So please check your spam box, the promotion folder, the junk folder, everywhere, and click on that email. Once you open the message, there is a link which will read, click here to set a new password. And once you click on that, you can give your own password and confirm it. Please note down this password somewhere so that, you remember what you have used. And yeah, Praveenji has sent the link on the chat box in case you have any query. So it's very simple. So what you have to do is just go into the web page, like I said, and then you're just going to write your email ID and type on forgot password. Once you give the option to reset your password, you will get a message in your email. And from there, you have to open the link, which will open you to this web page where you can set in your password. Once you open your password, once you give your login and your password, the page will open up. Shweta, do you want to show them the canvas or? Hello, Shweta? I'm not sure if I'm audible. Am I audible?
Yes, Priya.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Yeah, okay. So so this is how you log in. Now, if you have any problem or troubles with the login, you can please contact Raveen or Shweta and they can help you directly. but it's pretty much a very simple step. I don't think you all should have any issue. So with this, we have, I mean, is there any major query about the course before we move into module 1?
Priya, sorry, can you please repeat?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if you want to show them the what the canvas looks like.
Just give me 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, okay. So if there's any query, you can, I mean, you all can type in the chat box, or just regarding, if you have any issue about the course, or, you know, any queries regarding what needs to be done. If there's any major query. It's mostly self-explanatory. You have all the columns on your left. You have the module, you have the discussion, you have the grades. So there is one tab called grades. If you keep opening that, you will know which of your assessments are graded, which of them are not. And everything opens into a different link. And like I told you, please be careful with the quiz, because once you submit it, the attempt is over. So make sure you have answered all your questions before you hit on the submit button. And the videos are already uploaded. Again, if you do not have good internet connectivity, for each of the video, a transcript link is given, which means that whatever has been talked in the video, there is a PDF document of the entire transcript. So you can even download that and use it whenever you want to in an offline platform without the internet. You can still go through that. So that has also been shared. And all the readings are available. You can download all the readings whenever you can, and you can also read that online. So with
Hi.
that, yeah, yes,
Yeah,
Shweta?
can I share my screen,
Yeah,
please?
I'll stop share. Yeah.
Yeah, is the screen visible?
Yes.
Yeah. To people who have already logged into the course canvas, this is something the canvas looks like. This is the announcement section where announcements are posted by DGH, by the university. You'll get the complete information for the modules and the module, whatever it contains, what would be the timelines. On the left-hand side, you can see the syllabus tabs, the module tab, the discussions, assignments, and grades. Modules, you already know, these are chapters which are opened up weekly. The first and second module is accessible now. The third one will unlock on 11th of April. So that's 12th April for us. This is the Pacific time. The assignments are given in a separate tab. They can be tracked here. These are module-wise assignments. You can see the timelines. It is given available until June 20th. So these can be attempted by the end of the course, but if you attempt it on weekly basis, they are much easier. Grades can be accessed from the grades tab. As Dr. Priya has already mentioned, the scoring is 50% of the assignments and 50% of the quiz, and there are 8 credit points. So make sure that you attempt both, not only one. Again, when you look at the grades at the end of the page, please make sure you count the marks and don't go with the percentage. There's a percentage that is mentioned here, but please make sure you count the marks and then you see how 50% works for you. Yeah, any more questions? Anybody has any questions about the canvas? Pravinji, if you can allow participants to unmute themselves.
Yeah, it is given.
Okay. Participants can unmute themselves. If they have any questions, you can ask now, you can ask at the end of the session also.
I think just once you are there on the canvas and once you just try to play with all these navigation keys, it's very self-explanatory. And can you open one module? So if you look at module 1, for example, diagnosing HIV and initial evaluation, so it gives everything. So everything regarding this module will be available on this page, right from learning objectives and to these are the 2 lectures conducted by the UW. So they have already uploaded here. So you need to go through these recorded videos. Go down. And at the below, so below every video, you will see downloadable video. If you have, suppose, good internet connectivity at one particular place, you can download all these videos and keep it in a folder if you want it for future reference also. And if the bandwidth is not good, there is a PDF format also. You can download that and you can listen to audio. So there are multiple options available. No one is tracking you if you have seen these videos or not, but without going through them, you won't be able to solve the quizzes. So quizzes are based on these course contents or these slides. So it will be good to go through these. And of course, as Priya mentioned initially, it will be a US scenario or global scenario which will be discussed, which is a good opportunity for all of us. And all those practical points, clinical facilitators will try to include into the weekly clinical contact sessions. And if you come down to homework assignments, again, there is reading and also then homework assignments. So once you click on this, again, there are questions. Difference between quiz and homework assignment is, as Priya mentioned, quiz will be once you submit, it may not be changed. So it will give you, I think, 2 opportunities to submit the final quiz. But in homework assignment, there are multiple, you can take multiple shots. So you can keep it doing unless you get all the right answers. So extra credit is something which you would like to do because towards the end, if you fail to like submit the previous assignments or wherever, suppose you are scoring low, this extra credit will add to the percentage and will make it up to 70% if something is short. So this is also again good to go through assignment. And then there is some extra reading material, all the guidelines which have been referred to during the sessions. So those PDF documents have been uploaded. So you can download that. Again, you can keep that in folders for your future references. Again, this is good to have everything at one place. So it's good if you want to download and keep it in your record. That will be helpful for you in future. So all the modules every week, this will be one page where you will find everything about that module. And towards the end, if you want to take quiz, you can take it from here, or you can go to the left navigation again, the assignment tab, and then you can take it from there. So it's up to you.
Thank you, sir. Just one thing, in case you wish to download the material, please do it now, because after the course ends, only material remains accessible just for 1 month. So in case you intend to download it, do it now, as in when the modules open. That's all from my side.
Yeah, just one more thing for everyone. Before you, the first and second module needs to open, you have to do something called the course policy quiz. So Shweta, I'm sorry you closed it, but
no issues.
Yeah, so that's important. It is not graded. It is just something, this quiz is just to make sure that you've understood what the course requirements are. So only when you do or complete the course policy will the module 1 and 2 open. So in case you're logging in for the first time, we would recommend that you first finish the course policy. You need not worry about what points you get over here because this is not graded. This is just to understand whether you have understood the concept of how this course is going to flare up in the next 3 months. But after this, once you complete this and submit it, your modules 1 and 2 will open. So I request all of you to please do the course policy quiz first.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah. Okay.
It's visible.
So, yeah. So with this, we conclude the introductory part of the session and we move into module 1. So this week, all the content is related to the topic diagnosing HIV and the initial evaluation of a patient living with HIV. Now, I assume many of you are already working in ART centers. So some of the topics may be quite basic for you, but I think it's always good to have a refresher before we go ahead. So the outline for today's presentation, we are going to be discussing the epidemiology of HIV. We'll start with a global scenario and then move on to what is in India. Now, there are 2 recorded lectures which are available for this module. And for people who have already gone through the videos, you will know that a lot of epidemiology of the United States is discussed. It is good to know that, but obviously, yes, we need to know what we are dealing with as well. So it is also important for us to know the Indian scenario. So after the epidemiology, we will move into what is HIV, what the virus looks like, How does it progress? How does it cause disease? What is the history of natural history of HIV infection? From there, we will move on to various testing methodologies as to how HIV can be diagnosed. And once diagnosed, we need to know how they are, patients are to be linked to the ART center and what needs to be done over there as an initial evaluation of any patient who is entering the care system. So during the evaluation, it is important for us to understand two major classifications of HIV infection. One is the CDC classification and one is the WHO classification. And finally, we will touch upon the topic that is discussed in the video, which is uploaded by video taken by Adrienne in the first module, where she talks about differentiated service delivery models. So we begin with a global scenario. Now, this is the data as available in 2019. As of 2019, there were globally 38 million of people living with HIV, and there were 1.7 million new infections in the year 2019. Again, the deaths was around 690,000. So this gives us the numbers globally. And we can see that even children are still contributing to new infections. Children less than 15 years of age, they are also contributing to about 150,000 of the new infections, which is happening every year. Now, when we come to India, these are taken from the technical report of India HIV estimates of 2019. So in India, currently we have about 23.4 lakh people who are living with HIV. And amongst this, 22.7 lakh are adults and about 0.7 lakh, 79 lakh are children. The adult HIV prevalence in India currently is 0.22%. And in 2019, India, there were about 69,000 new infections in India, and there were about 58,000 people who died in 2019 due to AIDS-related causes. So though our prevalence is low, it is 0.22%, but in terms of numbers, it is huge. And hence we are about the second largest, we have the second largest number of people living with HIV in the world. So when we talk about prevalence, like I said, we are a low prevalent country, but in India, this prevalent rate, it differs according to states. So here we can see that though the country prevalence is only 0.22%, we have the highest states, that is Mizoram, Nagaland, and Manipur, which go above 1 and 2% prevalence, which is pretty high. So this is one of the main causes why, one of the main reasons why we need to look at new innovations, new interventions, because what we did as a part of care support and treatment 10 years ago may not work today in this scenario. So each PLHIV is different. They have different needs. The prevalence scenario is different. The population group affected is different in different states. And hence it is high time that we start thinking of new models to address these gaps. When you look at population groups, again, it is the injecting drug users who have the maximum HIV prevalence, and it is as high as 6.26%. So we can see that these are some of the key population groups, like you have the transgenders, the men having sex with men, female sex workers, prison inmates. These are people who fall under our key population category. And this is the reason why they are key population. It is because they have a different set of behavior which may contribute to this increased prevalence, and which also means that they require different targeted interventions in order for us to bring this prevalence down in the group. Now, just another thing, I mean, this was also taken up in one of the videos. So this here we are talking about what is the situation in India. But when we again look at, the same prevalence continent-wise, so we can say that in United States, the majority population who contribute to HIV is the MSM population. When it comes to Europe, it is more of IDUs. Then when it comes to Asia, where our country also follows, there are a lot of female sex workers. So again, globally also, if we see, there are different population groups which contribute to different amounts of prevalence of HIV. So that is why we cannot have a dictum of the same kind of treatment or the same kind of same kind of intervention everywhere. We need to analyze what is happening in the geography where we are. So this also depends on our individual center. So the learning from here is we are talking about national data, which may be very different from what your state is experiencing. Again, within states, different districts may have different prevalence. So if your center is one which is catering to a high number of IDU population, your the ART center itself may have to have specific interventions to cater to that population. So the reason behind giving you this is not to remember these numbers, but it is to just get yourself started in the thought process that the population coming to my center or to a specific ART center or to a district or to a state may be very different from the kind of population coming somewhere else. So accordingly, our approach may also need to be different. Now, when we come to talk about the national strategic plan, so this is something that India has. Obviously, our goal is ending of AIDS by 2030. So how do we aim to achieve this? Obviously, we need universal coverage of the prevention, care, and support treatment. That entire, what we call over here is continuum of care. Continuum is important because it starts right from your HIV testing and it ends in viral suppression. That entire cascade is called continuum of care. And it is important that at each step of this continuum, the methodology or the approach that we are using, it has to be effective, it has to be inclusive, equitable, and adapted to the needs of the PLHIV. So by our target, again, we had this UN fast track targets called 90-90-90, and that was supposed to be achieved by 2020, which we were not. There is still a gap in those 90-90-90 indicators. But now the shift is we need to get to this 95-95-95 goal by 2024. So our commitment is basically to the 3 zeros. We aim at achieving 0 new infections in HIV, 0 AIDS-related mortality, and 0 discrimination towards PLHIVs. So what is this 90-90-90? We were talking about it, I mean, even until now, these are the United Nations fast-track targets. So our aim is they set up these little milestones, as in if we want to technically eliminate or end HIV AIDS by 2030, there are shorter milestones that we need to achieve. So this 90-90-90 means that out of the population, the total population of positive people, it is estimated, like suppose you have an estimated number of 23.49 lakh population living with HIV. The first 90 says that 90% of this 23 lakh should know their diagnosis. Now here already there is a gap. Instead of 90, we have only 84. So right from the first 90, we have a gap. The second 90 talks about it says that out of the people who are diagnosed as positive, 90% should be on treatment. Again, we are only 84 here. And the third 90 says that out of the people who are on treatment on ART, 90% should have achieved viral suppression. So we can see that there are gaps in every indicators. So we were not able to achieve the 90-90-90 by last year for various reasons. But our new aim right now is 95-95-95. That is the new fast track goal that we have, the same 95, and we need to achieve it by 2024. So NACP4, what is NACP? It's the National AIDS Control Program, and we are in phase 4. So here we mainly talk about 5 prongs. The first deals with prevention. So if we are talking about these big targets of 95-95-95, eliminating HIV by 2030, obviously there has to be some strategies in place. When we talk about prevention, so this includes your targeted interventions for all the key population that we just discussed, including female sex workers, men having sex with men, truckers, migrants. Obviously, our HIV counseling and testing services, we have to aim at detecting HIV early. That's the key. And also prevention of transmission from parent to child. Then blood transfusion services, your STI and RTI, your sexually transmitted infections management, and condom promotion. So these are some of the key activities under the prevention head. Under care support treatment, it is what all we do in the ART center. So this includes providing the first line, second line, third line ART, how we manage opportunistic infections in the patient, what is our approach towards the HIV/TB co-infected cases, early infant diagnosis, and as well as regular monitoring of the patient. So this is in terms also of the adherence, whether the patient is adherent to his medicine or not, and whether viral suppression. So our lab services also include viral load testing. We need to ensure that the patient has a suppressed viral load. The third major component is institutional strengthening. Now, if we are talking about all these services that we are going to provide to the patient, obviously we need to have stronger institutions, and that will come from trained personnel, and that has to be at all levels. So under the SACS level, which is the State AIDS Control Society, under the district level, which is the District AIDS Prevention Control Unit, DAPCO, your technical service strength units, technical support units, your centers of excellence, and the research institutions. So they have to be strengthened if we are going to provide quality services to the PLHIV. Then we come to the strategic information management. Again, this is important. Why is it important? Not just to submit monthly reports to NACO. This is precisely whatever data that we get from the field. If we do not utilize it for the betterment of the program, there is no point having that data. So every time, even when we sit to prepare reports at our centers, we need to go a step higher and think about why we are doing this and what are we going to get out of it. Our aim should not be just to submit some numbers every month to NACO. We need to go back, look at our own data, look at what are the kind of population who are walking into our ART center, what is their demographic profile, how soon are we detecting them of HIV, how well are they responding to treatment, when do they require a switch, are they being switched to different regimens on time or not, what is their adherence. So all this program monitoring and evaluation has to be strengthened, because it is this data that comes from the centers which feeds into the data of the district, further into the state, and further into our national level data. So, and there is the fifth prong, which is IEC, which is overarching across all the other prongs. So this is information, education, and communication. So how much ever we know that the AIDS program has come a long way from what it was before, from people being scared of what AIDS was, and now all people who are seniors in the program will know what a huge change has already been built in. And this was precisely because we could make the patient more literate about what the disease is, and we could make them understand that there is good treatment available now, and it is possible for them to lead a good quality life. So all this is a part of IEC, and it is still important that in order to achieve this last milestone of our targets, the IEC also needs to be strengthened. So in our Indian setup, our care, support, and treatment services, so there is a 3-tier model. So what we have lowermost is the Link ART centers and the Link ART Center Plus. So these are at the level of sub-district hospitals or at the community healthcare center. Then moving on at the level of medical colleges or even district hospitals, we do have the ART centers. And then at select medical colleges in the country, we have the centers of excellence and the ART plus centers. So this is the 3-tier model of the service that we are providing to our patients. So with this, we move on to the basic. Now we know how our program is functioning and the broad areas of what our National AIDS Control Program talks about. Now we move on to the specifics of HIV per se. So again, these are basics. Most of you already know, but just to reiterate, HIV stands for human immunodeficiency virus. So it is self-explanatory that your immune system is being deficient, or your body's immune system is being attacked by this virus. And when we talk about immune system, the HIV virus specifically attacks the CD4 cells. And the problem is, because we are reducing, our body immunity reduces, we are highly likely to get other infections, which we term as opportunistic infections. So these are the different modes of HIV transmission. Obviously, it is unprotected sex is one of the major routes for transmission of HIV. Sharing of needles and syringes, mostly seen in the injectable drug users. Needle stick injury, which is experienced by healthcare staff. This could be your the lab technician, the staff nurse, or even the class 4 workers who are into cleaning, even they may have a needle stick injury during disposal of biomedical waste. Then another source of transmission, mode of transmission is through when your HIV infected blood gets transfused. We are able to significantly reduce this number and almost bring it to zero because of the rigid rules that we have now for the various blood banks. Again, the rest, the remaining two, that is during pregnancy, birth, and breastfeeding, it is a part of prevention of parent to child transmission. So the only avenues where you can transmit the infection to your child from the mother is either during pregnancy or during delivery of the baby or during breastfeeding. So these are the different modes. Now, when you talk about the risk, the obviously, blood transfusion, it shows more than 98%. That is obvious because we are directly transfusing infected blood into somebody's body. But when you talk about sexual intercourse, again, the rate of HIV transmission varies from 0.1 to 1%. And needle stick injury generally contributes to 0.3% of HIV. Has a 0.3% chance of transmitting HIV. Now, when we look at the path of HIV transmission, this is just, again, a brushing above basic pathology. But so first, your virus, suppose we take the example of unprotected sex. So there is exposure of HIV at the mucosal surface. So once this exposure happens, what happens is these viruses. So, and you can, on the left, you can also see the duration as to when this transformation is happening. So right from day 0 to day 2, what happens is these dendritic cells, they carry the virus and they carry it to a lymph node. And when it is transported to the regional lymph nodes, right from day 4 to 11, there is an exponential level of HIV replication, which happens in the CD4 cells. And once this happens, it is the replicated HIV cells, they are directly released into the bloodstream. And once it is released into the bloodstream, right from day 11 onwards, there can be widespread dissemination to all the organs in the body. So this shows how quickly the virus can cause the infection in the host and what is the method of or the path of this transmission. And within a cell, when we talked about viral replication over here, how does that replication happen? So this is your HIV structure. There is a core, there is an envelope. Once it comes into the host cell, the HIV, as you all know, it is a retrovirus, and which means that the genetic material is HIV RNA. And through the reverse transcriptase enzyme, it gets converted to DNA. And this DNA then gets integrated into the host DNA. All the other viral components are also reproduced, and then the entire assembly, including this, the integrated DNA, it gets assembled as HIV virus, and then the HIV virus gets distributed. So this is what happens within the CD4 cell. And this is the life cycle. Now, what happens as soon as you get infected in HIV? So here you can see that the red line that you see over here, it gives you the copy, it gives you the viral load, that is copies of the HIV RNA. And the blue line that you can see is the CD4 count. So as soon as you get infected, it is but obvious, like we just spoke about, there is exponential level of replication of the HIV. So we can see that there is a sudden spike in the red line, and this is what happens in the acute HIV syndrome. Now, as soon as when the virus is replicating, it is utilizing the CD4 cells to replicate. And hence, as the virus levels increase, as the viral load increases, your CD4 level is going down. Now, as it goes down, then there is what is called as a period of clinical latency. When we mean clinical latency, we mean that the person is infected, the person is infectious, but he or she may not have any symptoms. So this, again, the duration can vary from person to person. We'll be having a look at that soon. Depending on the individuals, there are some people who progress very fast. There are some people who progress very slow. And after the latency period, so what happens is once your viral load starts increasing, now slowly your body immunity also starts to fight back. And when it starts to fight back, that's why you can see a slight improvement in the CD4 cell count and your viral load goes low. But beyond a point, your body is not able to fight back. And when it is not able to, the virus takes over. And when the viral load again starts increasing, that is when the patient lands up with symptoms. I mean, the early symptoms first. And as your CD4 goes low, and especially when it goes below 200, there are severe opportunistic infections in the individual. So this basically gives you an outline of if you do not treat an HIV infection at all, if you do not administer ART, what will happen to the person who is HIV infected. So like I said earlier, there are patterns of progression. So typically about 50 to 70% people, they are typical progressors, which means that by the time they develop the end stage disease, it is about 8 to 10 years. There are about 10% people who are rapid progressors, which means that as early as within 2 to 3 years of diagnosis of the infection, they can develop the symptoms of AIDS. And this is also especially, it occurs in infants and children. And then we have something called slow progressors. 5 to 15% people fall in this category, and they can remain asymptomatic for about 10 to 15 years or so. And there are long-term non-progressors who relatively have a stable CD4 every time, and they continue to live even beyond 15 years with a stable CD4 count. And I mean, they do not end up with any HIV-related diseases. But for us, the important point is that we do not know that the PLHIV coming to us in what category he or she falls. So the thing is, we need to treat everybody, I mean, very, very carefully, because we cannot assume that this person is going to be a slow progressor or not. So whatever timely intervention in terms of ART initiation needs to be started, in terms of opportunistic infection management, in terms of prophylaxis, all this needs to be given equitably. Now, what is the association between opportunistic infections and CD4? Now, this was already covered in the earlier graph that we saw, but just to give you some more details. So this is the CD4 count that you can see in the y-axis. So it starts, I mean, all these can be AIDS, it can come under AIDS defining illnesses, your tuberculosis, your, the esophageal candidiasis, herpes zoster. But you can see that once the cutoff of 200, like below 200, there are more serious opportunistic infection. So this includes toxoplasmosis, cryptococcal meningitis, and progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, and all of these. So there are dangerous opportunistic infections when the CD4 goes below 200, because one's immune system is severely compromised. So what is the aim? Our aim is to firstly initiate the patient on ART quickly. Why? Because we do not want the CD4 count falling. Secondly, it is not only about initiation, it is about maintaining the patient on treatment or ensuring that the patient is adherent to treatment. Because again, we'll be talking about this further, but if any lack of adherence or any poor adherence in the patient will again give rise to increased replication of the virus, and which will again bring down the CD4 count quickly. So this is in one of the slides in the lecture videos where they are talking about acute HIV. So as early as 1985, this was described, a mononucleosis-like syndrome. That was what was described for HIV then. And it was all seen in men who had sex with men. So what were the clinical features? It included fever with sweats, headache, malaise, myalgia, lethargy, and a rash. So, I mean, most commonly what they saw was an erythematous maculopapular truncal eruption. And this is what they would characteristically see in an acute case of HIV. So these are the different symptoms that can occur during the acute phase. So which includes your headache, sore throat, fatigue, your glands swollen, weight loss, genital ulcer, and myalgia. Now, what is important to see here is you can see the ratio, the genital ulcer, the crude OR is about 46.5. So in this study, so the thing is commonly this examination gets overlooked. So it is important to identify. So when a patient comes to you, and if the patient is complaining, or on examination you find that there is a genital ulcer, and maybe the patient has a high risk behavior of, say, he falls under the MSM category, we have to typically think of HIV. So it is important. That's why that there has to be a complete examination of the patient, which in many cases we tend to overlook, but it is significant. So now the risk, why do we say that we need to identify the patient early? It is because, again, it is obvious. We can see that in the acute infection, that is initially, there is a high plasma viral load. And at this time, the patient is also highly infectious. So it is very important that if we can diagnose the patient early, the patient can be counseled early, even in terms of positive prevention. Their behavior, can be, the risk taking behavior can be minimized, and thereby we can reduce the rate of transmission. So that is the importance of early diagnosis. Why do we need early diagnosis? Because we want to reduce the risk behavior. So only when we tell the patient about the diagnosis can we expect there to be a risk reduction. And obviously, if we are going to diagnose early, we are going to be putting the patient on treatment early, and that will lead to an improved, not only increased, but also an improved quality of life, and it will also prevent HIV transmission. So this is the structure of the virus. So again, we have these core antigens, and then we have the envelope antigens. Amongst the core antigen, the P24 is one that is important. And we have three enzymes within the HIV structure. So there is reverse transcriptase, there is integrase, and there is protease. This is the basic structure. Now, it is according to this that we have a lot of testing strategies which have been defined and developed on the basis of this HIV structure. So typically, when we look at lab markers, again, we can see that initially, now what is this window period? It is when the infection has already occurred. The person is also infectious. That is, he is able to transmit the infection also, but the patient is seronegative. That is, when you do an antibody testing, the antibody testing turns out to be negative. So this duration of window period can extend anywhere between 3 weeks to 3 months. And it is important, that's why, that even if a patient turns out to be negative in your antibody testing, but the patient is of a high risk behavior, that patient has to be tested again, maybe after a period of after 3 to 6 months. So it is important that we ensure that the patient is not in the window period while doing the testing. So here we can see that obviously, and when we look at lab markers, the first thing to increase or to spike up is your viral load RNA. So when you have this nucleic acid amplification tests or all these viral load quantification tests, they are tests which can help you detect the acute HIV infection. But again, in our setup in the National AIDS Control Program, what we use regularly is the antibody testing. And we use the viral load only to monitor the progress of the treatment, not to make an HIV diagnosis. So in our setup, we do have the rapid tests, and we have the ELISA. So the confirmatory tests are the second and third generation rapid tests. And there is a Western blot assay, and this is to confirm the HIV-2 diagnosis. So here we use the blood sample, and for all the tests, we use the same blood sample of the person for all the tests for identifying the antibodies. So these rapid tests, they are to detect the HIV-1 and 2, and it can be performed on serum, whole blood, plasma, or saliva. But in India, what we use is the serum. Now, there is something called the whole blood fingerprint test, and this is done as a screening test, mostly used in the labor room for a pregnant woman. If we don't know her status and she walks into the labor room directly, this is done. Also, at a facility integrated ICTC, in community-based screening sites, we use the whole blood fingerprint. But whenever the whole blood fingerprint turns out to be positive, the sample has to be, the patient has to be tested again for a confirmatory test. So this shows the various generations. So even in the antibody testing, we have this first, second, third, and fourth generation. The difference is that as and when you progress, like for example, you can see that the 4th generation is the most advanced. Why? Because it reduces or shortens the window period significantly. What we have is the 2nd or 3rd generation, which is still not bad. But yes, I mean, we need to also analyze, like I said, even if the test report comes out negative, we must ensure that the person is not in the window period. And if there is continuous high risk behavior of the patient has to be tested at regular intervals to ensure that he is not HIV positive. So in the National AIDS Control Program, we have 3 types of testing strategies. One is what is done in the blood bank, where there is an ELISA done or a rapid test done. Then for surveillance, again, we use ELISA or rapid. And at the ICTC centers, we first do 1 rapid test. And if that is reactive, then we follow it, we test it 2 more times with the 2nd and the 3rd test. So this is the algorithm. At the ICTC, once the first test is done, if it is negative, the patient is reported as negative. If it is positive, the 2nd test is done. And after the 2nd test, irrespective of the result of the 2nd test, the 3rd test is done. And finally, you can see if all the 3 tests are positive, the report is positive. If any 2 tests is positive and 1 is negative, it is called an indeterminate test. And again, if 2 are negative and 1 is positive, if the patient has high risk behavior, it should be considered as an indeterminate test. And if the patient has low risk behavior, then it can be considered as a negative test. Now, for all these indeterminate tests, this blood sample should be collected again after 14 to 28 days, and it needs to be tested again. And if it continues to show an indeterminate result, the sample has to be referred to the National Reference Laboratory. So this is there. There is a document in the NACO website that is available on HIV testing guidelines, where you have a list of all these laboratories and what needs to be done for further referral. So now that we have diagnosed the patient with HIV, what is the next step? Our next step at the ART center is to put them on ART as soon as possible. So this is the latest rule that we are all following for about 2 years now, where all persons diagnosed with HIV infection, they are eligible for ART initiation. This is irrespective of their CD4 count, irrespective of their age or which population they belong to, what staging they are. So the basic line is that all people, anybody who is detected HIV positive should be put on antiretroviral treatment. So what are the considerations? Now, there are some major steps that need to be kept in mind before we put a patient on ART. So the first thing is they have to be registered in HIV care. We'll be discussing each of these steps in detail. After we do a registration, we are supposed to take the complete history, do a clinical examination, lab evaluation, and also the WHO clinical staging of the patient. Once this is done, we need to give chemoprophylaxis to patients if they are eligible for that. And if there is any opportunistic infection, that needs to be managed. At the same time, there is this new concept of advanced disease management. We'll be discussing about when a PLHIV is defined as a seriously ill patient and when they have to be referred to a higher center. Once the basic evaluation is done, it is very important to do a preparedness and psychosocial counseling of the patient, and before we put the patient on ART. So we first begin with registration. So it is very important to have a valid HIV report from the ICTC. The PID number, that is the personal identification number of the person, must be hello. Shweta, am I audible? I heard some disturbance in between.
Yes. Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So we need to have a valid report from the ICTC center, and we do need to see whether the person is HIV 1 or 2 positive or both. Now this is, I missed this. So there is, if the person comes to your center with only 1 test done at the ICTC and that is showing HIV 2, or the test is at the ICTC is showing as HIV 1 and HIV 2, then at the ART center, we are supposed to refer them to the lab. Just a minute, if I can. Yeah. So I think I missed this slide. Yeah. So please remember that if when the ICTC report, if it is mentioned that the specimen is reactive for HIV-1 and HIV-2, or HIV-2 is mentioned but only with one test, then the ART center is supposed to refer the patient to the designated HIV-2 referral laboratory. A fresh blood specimen is collected there, and the diagnosis of HIV-2 is made, and the result is sent to both the ART center. It is sent to the ART center as a hard copy and soft copy, and the ART center then hands over the report to the patient. But remember that if two differentiating testing kits were used and HIV-2 reactive is found in the ICTC, then no further testing is required and the patient is labeled as HIV-2. So this is also important when we need to know about what kind of infection the patient is suffering from. But now with the latest regimen of dolutegravir, I think this will come in the next session on introduction to ART. We can use the same regimen can be used for both HIV-1 and HIV-2 patients. So with this, then once the registration is done, a white card is prepared and a green book is prepared. The green book is given at the hands of the patient. White card is retained at the ART center. Detailed residential address and phone number. Having a valid address proof is not essential for beginning ART, but it is highly desirable. It is very important because we have all faced the problem that patients tend to miss appointments, they become lost to follow up later. So it is very important to have a valid phone number and a valid address for future tracking purpose. And also, it is very important to have a caregiver. Now, this is also something that is neglected at many places, but always it is important to look for a good support system for the patient. Why? Because again, we know that we are going to put the patient on a lifelong treatment. So obviously the patient requires that constant motivation, which we from the center may not be able to provide. So it is important for us to identify somebody who can give the patient that motivation in order to remain adherent to treatment. Now comes your history. So again, very, very important. So here in history, we are first going to look for your 4 symptom screening for TB. That is, you're going to ask about fever, weight loss, cough, night sweat. If any of the symptom is present, the patient is considered 4 symptom positive and has to further investigations need to be done. We will also look for any persistent symptoms like headache or any seizure, or because these will, again, we'll be talking about seriously ill and these symptoms will be covered there. We have to take a detailed medical history about comorbidities like diabetes or hypertension or cancer, any past history of HIV. When did the patient actually start ART? Did he take treatment from private setup before he came to your center? History of tuberculosis. Ask about sexually transmitted infections, any high risk behavior, especially any associated substance abuse. Why is this important? Because this can also affect the adherence to ART, and also about pregnancy and contraception. Now, with the dolutegravir regimen, again, the question of family planning and contraception becomes all the more important. That will be discussed in your next module. So this is about the history, and physical examination has to be from head to toe. Like I said, in many setups, owing to high burden, and we give reasons like there is just less staff, and this is we tend to overlook this part of examination, but it is important. Like we have to go back to medical school, and like we did a case examination there, it has to be done here. Please remember that the patient is coming to you for the first time. This also helps the patient to know how serious or how much importance you are giving him. So it is important to examine the lymph nodes, even your oral cavity, because if we are looking for any of the, if we have to classify them into WHO staging, like we are going to discuss later. So even things like oral candidiasis or esophageal candidiasis can put the patient in different stages. So it is important for us to go in detail and complete the examination in order for us to stage the patient properly. So this is again some of the system-wise signs and symptoms which are mentioned. You can have a look at this. Now we come to baseline investigations. Again, if we see the latest WHO guideline document also, it says that these investigations are desirable, but they are not essential for starting ART initiation. So when you have a good setup and when you know that, in order to start the patient on ART, it doesn't mean that you need to have all this in hand. If a patient is clinically stable, we can always send the sample for testing and then wait. We can start the patient on ART and then let the reports come when they come and then communicate the results to the patient. So these tests include your CBC, your urine routine microscopy, your blood sugar fasting, postprandial, serum creat, your liver function, which includes SGPT, serum bilirubin, your HBsAg, and anti-HCV IG, G, CD4 count, chest X-ray. So all these also, like if the cervical pap smear, if they are available, well and good. But even if they are not available or if it is not feasible, that shouldn't delay the initiation of ART. So the additional tests, depending on any symptom or sign that you elicit in the patient, you can direct them towards testing to rule out OIs. Like, for example, if you suspect tuberculosis, they need to be sent for CBNAT. And then if you're going to initiate them on ATT, you may have to do a complete liver function test, then sonography of your abdomen and lipid profile wherever available. So this is as per the physician's decision. But again, please remember that these are not essential for you to start your ART initiation in a clinically stable patient. So now the video talks about something called the CDC classification. Now, this is something that we do not follow in our setup, but for the purpose of the module, and obviously it is good to know another classification. This is a relatively very simple classification. The earlier version was 2008. The classification has been updated in 2014. So here, if the CD4 is above 500, we would label the patient as stage 1 when there is no AIDS defining condition. If the CD4 is between 200 to 499, it is labeled as stage 2. Again, there has to be no AIDS defining condition. And if the patient CD4 is less than 200 or we find any AIDS defining condition in the patient, then the patient goes to stage 3. So please remember that if the patient has a CD4 more than 500, for example, the patient has a CD4 of 550, but any AIDS defining condition is present, the patient will automatically go to stage 3. So what is this AIDS defining condition? This is the list. Now, nobody expects you all to by heart the list or keep it in mind. It is just, you can use this as a ready reckoner. But yes, so these are the different, so it includes, your candidiasis, cervical cancer, cryptococcus, CMV retinitis, encephalopathy, PCP, all of these, lymphomas, all of these come under the AIDS defining illness. So if the patient has any of these AIDS defining illness, he automatically goes to stage 3 of the CDC classification. Now moving on to the WHO classification. Again, there are 4 stages. In WHO clinical staging, there are 4 stages. So in the first stage is when the patient is completely asymptomatic or when there is persistent generalized lymphadenopathy. What is that? So there are painless lymph nodes and the lymph nodes are more than 1 centimeter in size. It has to be in 2 or more non-contiguous sites, except your inguinal region, in the absence of a known cause, and it has to be persisting for 3 months or more. So this is called PGL. And if you see this in a patient or if the patient is asymptomatic, then they fall under stage 1. Now, stage 2, again, there are different conditions in adults and children. I'm not going to go through each of this. Again, please use this as ready reckoners. You can always keep it wherever you're sitting in your ART center. You can keep this as ready reckoners in order for you to stage the patient quickly. A lot of your questions in the quiz and in the assessment, in the quiz is based on staging. And I think it should not be difficult because the list is already there with you. So this is about clinical. So this is again clinical staging 3, where you have different criteria for adults and children. And finally, you have clinical staging 4. Now, I'm not going through all of this in detail. You can always refer back to these tables, but it is important. Why is it important to stage the patient? because again, the response, the clinical response of the patient to ART is also important. So we cannot always base the progression or gauge the response of the patient only with the help of a CD4 count or a viral loop count. It is important to see the patient clinically. And if the patient is worsening from one stage or progressing from, say, stage 2 to stage 3, it means there is something wrong. Either the patient is not adherent to ART, or maybe that regimen is not working for the patient. So it is always important for us to go with this clinical staging. Now we come to the concept of advanced disease management. Now in advanced disease, so when you see the WHO definition, for all adults and adolescents and all the children over 5 years, advanced disease is defined as CD4 less than 200 or a WHO stage of 3 or 4. Now this is the general definition. So any patient with less than 200 CD4 or WHO 3 and 4 will be classified as having advanced HIV disease. Now, please remember that all children younger than 5 years old are automatically considered as having advanced HIV disease. Now, what are the major concerns? Why do we have this new concept of advanced disease? Because it is but obvious that if the patient is presenting to you with an advanced disease, it means there is an increased chance of morbidity and mortality in the patient. And here the mortality rates are highest during the first 4 weeks of ART. And even after ART initiation, there is the risk of mortality in these patients. And obviously, because they have an advanced disease, there is highest risk of transmission of HIV. So when is a patient termed to be seriously ill? So these are something called the danger signs that we need to remember. When the patient comes to you with a respiratory rate equal to or more than 30 per minute, when the heart rate is equal to or more than 120 per minute, if the patient is not able to walk unaided, or if there is any other clinical condition like a temperature more than 39 degrees Celsius with signs like headache or any other symptom that the doctor thinks is, this is based again on clinical judgment. Suppose a patient is coming to you with a seizure. So all this will be counted as danger signs. And if there is a patient with any of these danger signs coming to you, they have to be referred to the appropriate higher level facility for further management. So please remember, that is when we say that when we talk about ART initiation, for a seriously ill patient, it is first important to stabilize the patient. So when the patient comes to you with danger signs, he has to be first referred to a higher center for management. And once the patient stabilizes, it is only then that we will consider ART initiation. Now we come to chemoprophylaxis. So we already know that HIV leads to the occurrence of a lot of opportunistic infections. And obviously, people with a lower immunity have a higher chance of being infected with opportunistic infections. That is why when there are patients with a clinical stage 3 or 4, or when they have a CD4 less than or equal to 350, they need to be put on cotrimoxazole preventive therapy. Again, we have this isoniazid preventive therapy for all the patients who are 4 symptom negative and they do not have TB currently. They need to be started on IPT. Also remember that if there is a severe form of active OI present, ART should not be started in that patient until the opportunistic infection is treated or stabilized. The only exception is Mycobacterium avium complex and PML, that is progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, where because the commencing ART, that is starting ART, may actually be the preferred treatment. So this is about CPT. Like I said, in our program, what is available as chemoprophylaxis is we have CPT and we have IPT, that is isoniazid preventive therapy. And we also give fluconazole as a secondary chemoprophylaxis to prevent any recurrence of cryptococcal infection. So once the patient, we have taken the history, we have registered the patient, we have taken the history, complete physical examination is done, we have ruled out any opportunistic infection, WHO staging is done. So we know that the patient we can start ART immediately, but before that, one major step lies in preparing the patient. So what is important here is build a rapport. The patient is coming to you for the first time, and it is said that first impression is the best impression. The patient needs to trust you. The patient needs to trust all the staff in the center that whatever we are doing is for his well-being. So there has to be a psychosocial assessment. Please understand the environment in which the patient is. I mean, there has to be education proper about what HIV is, what is the treatment that is available, what is his future going to look like, how important it is for the patient to adhere to the treatment. Is there any barrier that the patient already has to adherence, and can that be rectified? And identify people or caregivers for the patient. Once this is done, so you can always begin by first understanding what the patient knows about HIV. Instead of we starting ourselves, the first step is always to ask the patient, what do you know about HIV? Do you know what it is? What do you think it is? Do you fear something? So these questions will help us analyze how much the patient knows, and only then our aspect of counseling should start. Before bombarding the patient with information, always understand what the patient already knows. And we need to give the patient the assurance that with the latest drugs available, if ART is started quickly and if the patient is adherent to treatment, he can have a good quality and long life, because now it is not, HIV is not a death sentence anymore, but it is a chronic and manageable disease. So it is very important for us. And along with this, it is important to know the family environment or the patient's social environment. Why? Because if there is something like, for example, he has an issue with disclosing his status to the family member, so he may have an issue taking the ART in front of them also. So that is again going to impact the patient's adherence. So it is important that both the patient and the caregiver, whoever is the caregiver, they need to understand that ART is a lifelong treatment. Adherence to ART is important. There can be some side effects. They have to be counseled for what needs to be done for them, how the ARV drugs need to be stored, and also about what is, if they have that good emotional support at home or not. Again, the difference with treatment of HIV, that is ART and any other regular treatment, is we need a high level of adherence. And by high level, we mean 100%. So the problem is when there is that lack of adherence. So suppose the patient is missing his pill. The problem is that the HIV virus will again start to replicate. And if there is lot of intermittent, gaps in the treatment, there is high chance that the virus will develop resistance. So we may have to switch the patient to higher regimens. And right now we all know that, we have 3 line of ART, first line, second line, and third line regimens available. But our aim should be to retain the patient on the first line regimen for as long as we can, because very soon we will run out of options of what ART can be given. And hence it is important for us to counsel the patient that 100% adherence is critical to HIV treatment. Also, what is important is just because the patient is taking ART, it doesn't mean that the patient cannot transmit infection. So until and unless there is an absolute low viral load, until and unless there is viral load suppression completely, the patient is still capable of transmitting the HIV infection to his partner. Hence, it is important for us to say that they should still follow safe sex practices, follow positive prevention strategies, and they must have risk reduction behavior. So when we prepare the patient and the caregiver, we need to ensure that we address these 4 questions. What are the medicines which the patient needs to take? When does the patient have to take them? How does he have to take them? And who is going to administer it? Who is going to administer it? This is especially in cases of children and if there are terminally ill patients. And also, we need to tell them about the side effects that they may experience, what they should do if they have a side effect. And we must also always tell them that the ART center is available for, to address any queries that they may have, and also for any support that they want in terms of taking the treatment. So again, what we are going to what we are going to thrust upon here is the timely initiation of ART. Once we are assured that the patient is counseled, the patient is clinically stable, he has no active OIs that need to be managed, then we need to initiate ART in the patient. So more about rapid ART initiation and what regimen needs to be introduced, that will be covered in the second module of the course. So with this, we come to the second part of today's lecture, where I will be talking a little about what is known as the differentiated service delivery models. Now, this is something that is a part of the second video, which is uploaded in your module, the video taken by Adrienne, where we are basically, so in the beginning, when we talked about epidemiology, we already saw that there is a lot of gap that we have in attaining the 90-90-90. So we are carrying forward that gap in future. So our task of attaining 95-95-95 is going to be even more difficult. So like I said earlier, there has to be some innovative concepts. There has to be innovative ways in which we are going to address these gaps. One of the innovations is this concept of differentiated service delivery models. So this is our what we are looking at. We need to have these fast tracks 95-95-95. According to UNAIDS, it's 2030, but according to our national strategic plan, we have to achieve it by 2024. So how do we do it? Now, this is what is the continuum of care. We start with, there is the general population, there is the priority population, key population. First of all, they need to be tested. We need to ensure that we have, high uptake of HIV testing. Once the patient is tested positive, they have to be initiated on ART. When they are on treatment, they have to be constantly counseled and monitored and supported so that they are retained on treatment. And finally, when there is good adherence, we are aiming at the patients achieving viral load suppression or an undetectable viral load. This is the continuum of care. Now, at each stage, we have to increase the coverage and we have to increase the uptake if we have to achieve the 95-95-95 goals. So what are the challenges that we are facing currently? Now, we all know that, overall, even India is considered as a resource limited setting. So there are a lot of barriers in each step of the continuum care. First is testing is not 100%. We are still not able to detect all the patients who are estimated to have HIV. So especially why? Because we are not able to take the testing to the key population where the prevalence is more. Like we saw earlier that IDUs have a high prevalence, but we are not sure if we are testing all the IDUs. So the testing is not reaching the right population. Secondly, once the patient is tested, linkage to care is again, so even, there are cases, even all of you are aware of, that even the patient who is tested at the ICTC, there is a gap or we may lose the patient before the patient reaches the ART center. Secondly, even at the ART center, thirdly, it could be that once you initiate the patient on ART or even before initiation, the patient, misses his appointment, he doesn't come back to your center. That is what we are trying to address by rapid ART initiation. We do not want that linkage loss. And second, and also there may be a problem in retaining the patient in the ART center for a long time. Like we said, it's a lifelong treatment. So there may be complacency, after many years, the patient may feel that he is okay. The patient may not want to continue the medicines and we are not able to retain the patients. So all of this, so at every step of continuum of care, we have a barrier, we have a gap. So what is the lesson? The lesson is that business as usual, that approach will not work anymore. If you're going to continue what we were doing before, it may not work. So there is a hypothesis that this differentiated service delivery models will address these challenges. What do we mean by DSD models? So basically they are all client-centered approach. What are we trying to do? We are following the same continuum, but each patient may have a different need. For example, a patient who is stable may want to come to your clinic, just collect the medicines and go back. He may not want to spend more time. Whereas a patient who is unstable, or a patient, who has some psychosocial barrier to adherence, that patient may require more time at the ART center for counseling, more time at the ART center for further maybe, investigations or some other follow-up. Using differentiated service delivery models, we can give the time to those patients who actually require them, and we can save the time of those patients who do not need to be present at the ART center for long. So in this ways, it is a two-way benefit. The patient is benefited because his or her needs are addressed, and the center is benefited because the burden of the center reduces. And especially in resource limited countries like ours, we must make the maximum efficient use of our resources. So it is very important that, and this DSD model can help us in that. So basically, we are going to decentralize both. So when we talk about DSD models, it is not only in terms of ART centers and treatment. Differentiated service delivery models can also happen in testing. So where you go to, maybe there is a community-based testing, there is self-testing. So as and when the models get decentralized, there is more streamlining, and these models then become differentiated service deliveries. So here, for example, you can see that in testing, you can have decentralized testing, you can have KP specific testing. When it comes to ART initiation, you can have a package of services which are provided only to stable patients, and you have multi-month dispensation, you have community refill groups. All these come under ART. And for adherence, there can be adherence clubs, there can be SMS reminders. You can use or have all these digital innovations for your patients to have a better adherence, peer support clubs. So these are all the if you notice here, all these strategies are something where we are trying to address the need of the PLHIV. Hence, DSD is a client-centered model, and implementing this will actually, in various studies, it has shown that the retention to care improves in the DSD models, and even your viral suppression rate is, improved by about 25% when you compare to the other regular service delivery models. So these are the different examples of DSDM, like you have even your own Link ART center, because again, it is a decentralized version of the ART center. So that is also an example of DSD. You have multi-month dispensation, you have ART centers and OST centers, which are co-located. You have ART, distributed in prisons, community ART refill groups. All of these are examples of differentiated service deliveries. So in our own centers, the idea of why NACO started the concept of multi-month dispensation is precisely for this. Why? Because again, in multi-month dispensation, we are giving multi-month to the stable patient. So automatically the footfall of your ART center decreases, and it is expected that the extra time that you're getting right now by administering MMD to the stable patients should actually be utilized to provide more enhanced services to the unstable clients. And in that way, we can ensure that there is higher treatment coverage, there is higher adherence, and there is higher viral load suppression. So with this, I think, with this, I conclude my session today.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Anwar sir, you want to add anything?
Sir had to leave. Yes, sir had to leave for some other commitment.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, participants can now unmute themselves and ask any questions. Ma'am, there was a question from Dr. Ashish. Now, this was for slide just before the DSD slide. I'll tell you the slide number.
Okay.
I think 78 and 79. Slide number 78, 79. You can go back to
I'll have to go back.
Yeah, just before this. Yeah.
This one?
Dr. Ashish, sir?
No.
Is this the slide? The next one?
Back slide, ma'am.
Ma'am, 78 and 79, please. Next one.
Yeah, 1 minute.
Mm.
This one? Or this one?
More.
Yes. Yeah. Next, ma'am. Next slide.
Ma'am, slide number 78.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. This slide.
Yeah. He needs.
Oh, you want me to repeat this?
Right.
Okay. So basically what we are trying to tell here is the reason why we have these gaps in our 1990 targets is because we are not able to provide ART treatment completely to all the patients who require it. So the first thing is, where is the gap arising? First is we are not testing all the population. So like we said, the prevalence is high in IDUs, but we are not able to get our testing services to the IDU population, to the key population. Secondly, even if they get tested, there is a linkage loss even from the ICTC to the ART center. We lose a lot of patients there. Thirdly, even if there is ART initiation at the center, we are not able to retain the patients in our ART center on treatment. So all these are basic challenges that we are having in order to increase ART coverage. What will happen here if we want to rectify these challenges is that we need to think of some new models. So when we talk about differentiated service delivery, if the patient is not able to come to the center for testing, we are going to take the testing to the patient, to the community. So that is one model of DSD. Similarly, if the patient is not able to come to your ART center regularly for taking medicines, we can start a community ART refill group. That is a new model where in the community, one person can come and take medications for about 4 or 5 people in the community and take it back. So what we are doing is we are saving the time and money of all the 5 people who come to the ART center, and we are reducing it with only one person traveling. So these are different models which have already been launched, globally across various countries. And in India also, we have started a lot of these kind of models. Like for example, this community ART refill group is already happening in the Northeast. So MMD is happening throughout the country. So these are all new models that we are trying to address these challenges. We are trying to improve ART coverage using these DSD models. I hope that's clear.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat box.
Yeah, I'm just opening the chat box. I didn't get your question. More or less, this is like blended clinical training. See, blended clinical training is why? Because blended clinical training is the NACO training for all our ART center medical officers. Now, in our UW course, what they talk about in their modules is very specifically related to the US scenario. So we, in terms of your modules and your quizzes, and if your aim is only to, score well, you can just look at the modules and look at the videos, and you'll be able to do the quizzes. You can do the readings and you can do the assessment. But for people who are working on the field, it is very important that you understand what is happening in India. And for India, we can only take guidelines from NACO. We cannot take it from anywhere else. And that is why the NACO, slides from NACO have been used over here, because that is what is being practiced, and that is the guidelines by NACO. So we cannot create new guidelines. So we need to know about what is happening in our country and simultaneously understand what is happening globally as well. So
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah,
no more questions.
Yeah, okay. So I think the PPT will be shared to all of
Yes,
you.
ma'am.
Yeah, and if there are any questions, you can also, post it on the WhatsApp, or, you can get in touch with any of us if you have questions. Even in any of the other content in the module, you can always get back to us. And please, again, I would like to, Shweta, I'm sorry, what is the deadline for the quiz? I forgot. It's Monday?
The deadline is Monday, but then again, it remains open till the end of the course, because, few participants have approached us saying they have some other exams coming up.
Okay.
So we have told them this will remain open till the end of the course, and they can do it later also, maybe 2-3 weeks after the scheduled time.
Okay.
But then it's not encouraged for sure.
Exactly. So please, it is recommended that wherever possible, all of you, please try to use the weekends and, spend more time in the weekend and try to complete, because in general, all the deadline or the due dates for the quiz is Monday, 12:30 p.m.
Yes.
So please finish your all the work or assignments related to module 1. Please try to finish it in this weekend.
Yeah, just one more thing. The assignments are also quiz. It's not a narrative thing.
Yeah, it's not a narrative.
It's like a MCQ. So please do the assignments, and they have multiple attempts also. So please open up assignments and have a look at it. Don't panic at the end saying that it's going to be like how many modules we are going to do now, because we don't have access to your grades, and it's very difficult for us to motivate you, to ask you, please complete it. Don't wait till that 70% thing. And
Yes.
anytime you can WhatsApp, you can send a personal message also if you're not comfortable WhatsApping on group, even that is okay. And in case you're not able to attend a particular session, please send a message on the group or as a personal message, or you can even log into the session from your mobile.
Yeah.
That's all, ma'am. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all your time.
Thank you,
and
everyone.
yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, ma'am. We'll end the session now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, madam.